Let's go!
How many times have we done this friggin' Legacy, huh? How many times have we done this shit? It's been, this is the third time. Tekken 7, we did a Tekken Legacy. We did another one for Kazuya in Smash Brothers, which was fun. Now we're doing something obviously a little bit different, sort of similar to what we did with Street Fighter. Kind of having like a recollection of what the heck Tekken is like in 2023. Just for the sake of posterity, right? I bought this game on my PlayStation because it was cheap. I think it was $5 for disc only at some sort of game store. So that was my experience with Tekken 1 in the ripe age or time of maybe 1996, maybe 1997. As a kid that had a Saturn and stuff like that, I had Virtua Fighter 2 already. I felt like I got ripped off. Tekken, I mean, until you start to really figure out its systems, for somebody that's like a 10 or 11-year-old, I felt like I spent $5 and I got ripped off, dude. Like this Tekken shit was no good compared to VF. And even Virtua Fighter 1 is pretty rough. It still felt kind of responsive. I think one of the toughest things of Tekken 1, it does not feel like a really responsive game because the movement is the weirdest shit, right? Like, movement in this game is so bizarre to just get used to until you have to, like, unlock things, right? Through the power of skill. So that was my initial impression. And I think that that impression is still justified because Tekken wouldn't exist without Virtua Fighter. As we were learning earlier, there was a lead designer that worked on Virtua Fighter 1, left Sega for Namco to make Tekken 1. So of course, yeah, there's a lot of things that are pretty similar in the bones of the game. No actual, like, real 3D movement, just like VF1. They took out ring outs, but they added their own opposition of it, which is like infinite stage. Yeah, Keiichi Ishii, I think. Oh, so we were talking about him earlier. And moon jumps, right? So the game just has weird Virtua Fighter moon jumps for whatever reason. It's just like, are they good? No. They don't really fit into combat at all, it feels like. They just feel awkward and weird, just like they do in Virtua Fighter. And they have the same big OTG punches, but they're not as responsive as VF, you know? I feel like for the time, this came out about a year after Virtua Fighter 1. And I think by the time Tekken had sort of arrived, Virtua Fighter 2 was either out or just about to be out. So, you know, if you were going to the arcade and you were looking at something like Tekken and right next to it was Virtua Fighter 2, which is still incredible looking to this day, dude, Virtua Fighter at the time was just revolutionary. You know, it inspired a lot of things, Tekken included. Talking about the roster, and it's crazy to see how big the roster is in Tekken 1. There's quite a bit of characters in here. And, you know, to go back and remind yourself that Julia Chang is here, that Lee is also here. Armor King also was in Tekken 1. They were just secret characters. It's kind of surprising. Oh, it's Michelle Chang. Sorry. I think it's like, I always get them mixed up. It's Wang that also made it in here that I was kind of blown away that, wow, there's way more characters in Tekken 1 than I remember. But there are two different versions of T1. And we went through both of them to sort of see the differences between them. And funny enough, I actually feel that there's some positives for the arcade version and some positives for the console version. Obviously, the console version has way more content because it actually has cutscenes and its endings and stuff. Arcade version has significantly better texture work, and that's painfully clear because the PlayStation 1, it lacks a lot of RAM, so it just doesn't have the RAM for good textures, right? It doesn't have the RAM for 2D games or textures because PS1 issues. The detail in the arcade version is kind of revolutionary. So it isn't the first game to do this because Virtua Fighter 1, soon after it came out, had Virtua Fighter Remix. But Virtua Fighter 1 did not have like really true textured polygons, but Tekken did. And it sort of emulates character lighting and stuff by just like shading in the muscles of characters on the polys. It actually looks pretty decent. It actually kind of visually looks okay in the arcade version. I'm like, this isn't bad, especially in comparison to VF, which is obviously very blocky looking. But that's a big difference, is that I think people have to realize how revolutionary it was to have textures on polygons. It was not a lot of games were doing this kind of stuff yet. And that is a big draw of the arcade version. But The console version is just better in every single way. Like most Tekken games, the console version is just better. I think you get more characters, you get more, like a huge roster. We get to play as Devil. They rearrange the music in the console version. The console version also sounds really good too. Tekken's a weird series where it's like doing a legacy for this is hard because you literally need old hardware. The only way we were able to play Tekken 1 was by playing literally Tekken 5. And if we wanted to play the arcade version of Tekken 1, T5 has like a port of the arcade version in that game in something called Tekken Arcade History. And this is kind of an overarching issue that Bandai Namco has in general with almost all of its fighting games. They're never re-released, man. Very few times are they ported over, and I think Soul Calibur is one of the most ported over games there is, because Soul Calibur 1 and Soul Calibur 2 got HD ports on like PS3 360, but Tekken didn't, dude. So if you want to play Tekken 1 nowadays, like, where do you go? If you want to play Tekken 2, there might be a version somewhere on like PS5 or something like that. There's never been an actual Tekken collection. It's fascinating to me because the PlayStation 1 version of Tekken is actually better, in my opinion, if at least by going from the Tekken history version of Tekken 5, you know, Tekken 1 arcade. It ran good, but as we played the game on PS1, I quickly noticed, dude, this version of the game runs way better. I can just do moves easier. It feels smoother. I don't know, it might be something with the arcade collection. I'd have to like do some frame counting, but it feels like it's just running at a lesser frame rate, maybe at like a 50 FPS or something like that, which isn't that weird because, dude, Virtua Fighter 1 ran at like 30. So there's reasons to play the PS1 version, right? There isn't actually just like, oh, arcade version better. No, PS1 version has a lot of stuff to it, and it has big CG cutscenes. Because of course, if you were on PlayStation 1, you had to have CG cutscenes. You just did, dude. And that essentially becomes a staple of the Tekken series going forward, where you get like an arcade mode and you get a CG ending for your character. And weirdly enough, that kind of carries Tekken casually for a long time, man. For a very long time. That's where like the meat and bones of the gameplay of this series ends up residing, and why the game gets so much of its like sort of casual audience. Because Tekken 1 wasn't super successful, but as we move forward, Tekken 2 starts to blow up a bit, and the arcade version of Tekken 2 is pretty popular. But I'd just say for me personally, this run, I played on an arcade stick this time, man. The first time I think ever. I played T1 with an arcade stick on the right side because I can't do any Mishima shit on the left, and hitting like whiff punishing electrics with Kazuya. Yeah, this is good. The movement sucks, right? Just the forward momentum movement, like Weivu and stuff like that, I'm not good at it, but it feels like okay. But backwards movement, everything feels so stilted and funky that it's hard not to notice it. Like the first 5-minute impression of this game is brutal, man. 30 minutes later, and like after one playthrough, figuring out how the AI works, I was kind of having fun. I was having more fun than I've ever had at any point of us revisiting the Tekken series in previous legacies. So I have to give that game some credit here. You know, I tried to do my best to sort of like acclimate towards like, you know, crouch dash and stuff like that to figure out what I'm doing. But I really started enjoying it because, you know, the game's busted as shit. You land one launcher and you're just getting 75% damage to, you know, death combo or some shit. Game is hilariously friggin' busted. But believe it or not, Tekken 1, I have a better impression here than I did when I first came in, that's for sure.